A millionaire widower, after a devastating airport accident, is left wheelchair-bound and abandoned by his only daughter. But fate has a shocking twist in store. The clock at Detroit Metropolitan Airport read 6:15 a.m., its sharp digital numbers glaring against the bustling terminal. Monday mornings were always chaotic, filled with harried travelers pulling suitcases, the murmur of overhead announcements, and the faint aroma of coffee from nearby kiosks. Amid the rush stood Vincent Hamilton, a man who seemed out of place amidst the frantic energy. Impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, he exuded confidence and composure, a symbol of success and power. Yet, beneath his polished exterior lay a loneliness that no amount of wealth or power could erase. Vincent, a widower and one of Detroit's most influential businessmen, was on his way to a critical meeting in New York. His private jet was undergoing maintenance, so he reluctantly opted for a commercial flight, a rare occurrence for someone of his stature. The trip wasn't just about business, though. He'd been clinging to a hope that his absence might soften the growing chasm between him and his daughter, Emily. As he scrolled through his phone in the terminal, he reread the message he'd sent her the night before. "Don't forget about dinner tonight. It's been too long since we've talked." Vincent had planned everything carefully: a private chef, her favorite dishes, even a bottle of her late mother's preferred wine. But as the minutes ticked by, his phone buzzed with a reply. "Sorry, Dad. I'm busy." The words hit him harder than he cared to admit. It wasn't the first time Emily had canceled, but the sting never lessened. Since the death of his wife, Catherine, 5 years earlier, Vincent had struggled to maintain a meaningful connection with his only child. Emily, now 23 and fiercely independent, seemed to be drifting further away with each passing day. Once, she had been his solace, the light in his darkest hours. But now, she seemed more like a stranger, her once warm demeanor replaced by a cool detachment. The loudspeaker crackled, announcing the boarding call for his flight. Vincent sighed, slid his phone into his pocket, and made his way to the gate. The terminal was crowded, and as he navigated through the throng of passengers, he couldn't shake the ache in his chest. He tried to focus on the meeting ahead, but his thoughts kept circling back to Emily. And then everything changed in an instant. A group of late passengers rushed past him, their frantic movements colliding with an airport employee pushing a heavy baggage cart. The collision sent the cart careening wildly across the floor. Vincent turned, but he was too late. The cart slammed into him with brutal force, sending him crashing to the ground. The pain was immediate and excruciating, radiating from his lower back and legs. Voices rose around him, a cacophony of gasps and shouted commands. His vision blurred as airport staff rushed to his side, and he could barely register the chaos. In that moment, one thought pierced through the haze: I can't move my legs. Hours later, lying in a hospital bed, Vincent received the news that would alter his life forever. A spinal fracture had left him paralyzed from the waist down. The man who once commanded boardrooms and walked with unshakable confidence was now confined to a wheelchair. The first person to visit him was Emily, but her presence offered little comfort. She stood by his bedside with her arms crossed, her face a mixture of discomfort and impatience. "I'll come by tomorrow," she muttered after a few minutes of stilted conversation. But she didn't come. Days turned into weeks, and Vincent found himself alone more often than not. The mansion he returned to after his hospital stay felt like a mausoleum, cold, empty, and filled with echoes of a life he no longer recognized. Emily's absence was glaring. When he reached out, her replies were brief and detached. One evening, as he sat in his wheelchair in the cavernous living room, staring at a family portrait of him, Catherine, and a much younger Emily, the weight of it all finally broke him. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered to the empty room, "Where did I go wrong?" The pain wasn't just physical. It was the ache of a life unraveling, of bonds breaking that once seemed unbreakable. Vincent believed this was the end, a descent into a solitary existence where his only companions were regret and sorrow. But life had other plans. Unbeknownst to Vincent, the darkest moments often give way to the brightest dawns. What he saw as the conclusion of his story was merely the prelude to a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, resilience, and redemption. Vincent Hamilton's life had become a quiet, monotonous routine. Once the center of the corporate world, now he was a man trapped by his wheelchair, trapped by the walls of his sprawling mansion, and most painfully, trapped by the isolation that had seeped into every corner of his existence. His mornings began with the soft hum of the automated blinds opening to let the sunlight stream into his bedroom. Once, he would have bounded out of bed, ready to tackle a day filled with meetings, phone calls, and strategic decisions. Now, it took a nurse to help him transition from his bed to the wheelchair, every movement a reminder of his new reality. The mansion, with its gleaming marble floors and opulent decor, felt cavernous and cold. The wealth that once symbolized his power and influence now seemed like a cruel joke. It couldn't buy back his mobility, nor could it heal the wounds in his heart. The staff, once bustling and attentive, now seemed distant. They performed their duties efficiently, but without warmth. Vincent couldn't blame them. His sharp demeanor and terse instructions had built a wall between him and those around him. He had never been the type to open up or share his vulnerabilities, and now that stoicism only deepened his loneliness. But nothing hurt more than Emily's absence. Since his accident, their already strained relationship had deteriorated further. Emily rarely visited, and when she did, the encounters were brief and uncomfortable. She would sit across from him in the grand living room, scrolling through her phone or answering emails, her attention never fully on him. Vincent tried to spark conversations, asking about her job, her friends, even her favorite topics like art and photography, but her responses were curt and dismissive. "Emily," he had asked one afternoon, his voice tinged with desperation, "don't you want to spend more time with me? I miss you." She had looked up from her phone, her expression neutral. "I'm busy, Dad. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "But I'm your father," he had replied, his voice cracking. "We used to be so close. What happened to us?" Her response had been a dagger to his heart. "Maybe you should ask yourself that question," she said coldly before leaving the room. Vincent spent hours replaying that conversation in his mind. Was she right? Had he been too consumed by his work to notice her slipping away? The guilt gnawed at him, but he couldn't undo the past. The days blurred together. Vincent tried to distract himself by immersing in books, news, and even an occasional board meeting via video call. But the energy and passion he once felt for his work were gone. It was hard to care about profit margins and market trends when his personal life was in shambles. One evening, after another solitary dinner, Vincent wheeled himself into the library. The room was filled with memories. Shelves lined with books Catherine had loved, a grand piano Emily had played as a child, photographs of family vacations and milestones. He stared at a framed picture of the three of them, taken on Emily's 10th birthday. Her smile in the photo was radiant, her arms wrapped around her parents with pure joy. Where had that little girl gone? And where had the man who once made her feel so safe and loved disappeared to? Lost in thought, Vincent barely noticed when his nurse Margaret entered the room. She had been working for him for months, but rarely spoke beyond what was necessary. Tonight, however, she hesitated. "Mr. Hamilton," she said softly, "if I may, I've noticed how much you miss your daughter." Vincent looked up, startled. He wasn't used to the staff addressing personal matters. "She's all I have left," he admitted, his voice heavy with sorrow. "But I don't know how to reach her anymore." Margaret paused before responding. "Sometimes people don't realize what they have until it's gone. Maybe she's too caught up in her world right now, but that doesn't mean she doesn't care. She might just need time. Her words were kind, but they offered little solace. Time was something Vincent felt he was running out of. Not because of age or illness, but because each day of silence from Emily felt like another brick in the wall between them. Weeks passed, and Emily's visits grew even rarer. When she did come, it was often to discuss practical matters, bills, meetings with lawyers, or estate plans. There was no warmth, no hint of the bond they once shared. One afternoon, Vincent overheard a conversation between Emily and a friend on the phone. "He's just so needy," Emily said, her voice filled with frustration. "I don't have time to babysit him. He doesn't understand how demanding my life is right now." The words cut deeper than any injury ever could. Vincent didn't confront her. Instead, he retreated to his room, where he sat in silence, staring out the window. As the days turned colder, Vincent's hope for reconciliation with Emily began to fade. He had always believed that love and family were unbreakable, but now he wasn't so sure. What he didn't know was that this wasn't the end of their story. Fate had a way of intervening, and the path ahead was far from predictable. The harsh Michigan winter had settled over Detroit, blanketing the city in a layer of frost. Vincent Hamilton watched from his study as snowflakes danced outside the tall windows of his mansion. The fire crackled in the hearth behind him, but its warmth did little to thaw the coldness that had settled in his chest. It had been weeks since Emily's last visit. She had sent a terse text explaining she was overwhelmed with work, but Vincent had stopped expecting more from her. He told himself he understood. She was young, ambitious, and trying to carve out her own life. But understanding didn't make the loneliness easier to bear. One gray afternoon, as the snow piled high on the driveway, Vincent heard the faint chime of the doorbell echo through the house. Startled, he turned his wheelchair toward the door of his study. Visitors were rare these days, and he hadn't scheduled any appointments. "Margaret?" he called, his voice carrying down the hall. Moments later, his nurse appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed. "There's someone at the door," she said. "I wasn't expecting anyone. Should I send them away?" "No," Vincent replied, curiosity breaking through his usual apathy. "Let them in." Moments later, Margaret returned with a young woman trailing behind her. She was bundled in a threadbare coat, her dark hair spilling out from beneath a knit cap. Her face was pale from the cold, but her brown eyes were sharp and searching. She looked both nervous and determined, as though she had rehearsed this moment countless times. "Mr. Hamilton," the woman began, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. "My name is Sarah. I think we need to talk." Vincent studied her, confused. There was something vaguely familiar about her, though he couldn't place it. "Do I know you?" he asked. "No," she said quickly, "but I know about you." She hesitated, then glanced at Margaret. This might be a conversation best had in private. Margaret looked to Vincent for direction. He nodded, and the nurse excused herself, leaving the two alone. Sarah stepped closer, clutching a small, weathered envelope in her hands. "I don't know how to say this, so I'll just come out with it," she said. "I believe my mother and you had a connection a long time ago." Vincent's heart skipped a beat. "Your mother?" "Her name was Evelyn Carter," Sarah said softly. "She passed away 2 years ago." The name hit Vincent like a freight train. Evelyn Carter. He hadn't heard that name in over 3 decades, but he could never forget her. She had been his first love, a bright and spirited woman he'd met during his college years. They had been inseparable for a time, dreaming of a future together. But when Vincent had been offered an internship that promised to launch his career, their paths had diverged. He had chosen ambition over love, and they had lost touch. I knew Evelyn," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "She was someone very special to me Sarah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She spoke of you often, especially toward the end. She said you were the love of her life, but she also said you didn't know about me. The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. Vincent felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Didn't know about you, he echoed, his mind racing to make sense of her statement. She told me that she found out she was pregnant after you left, Sarah explained, her voice trembling. But by the time she worked up the courage to tell you, you were already gone. She didn't want to disrupt your life or your career, so she kept it to herself. She raised me alone. Vincent's breath caught in his throat. The implications were staggering. You're saying... I'm saying I'm your daughter, Sarah said, her voice breaking. The room fell silent. The fire crackled in the hearth, but Vincent hardly noticed. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, disbelief, guilt, and a strange, aching hope. I know this is a lot to take in, Sarah said, her tone gentler now. And I didn't come here to demand anything from you. I needed to meet you, to understand the man my mother spoke of. Vincent stared at her, searching her face for traces of Evelyn. He saw them in her sharp cheekbones, her determined gaze, and the slight tilt of her chin. Why now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I've spent my whole life wondering, Sarah admitted. And after my mom passed, I found letters she had written to you but never sent. I knew I had to find you, even if it was just to fill in the blanks. Vincent felt a tear slip down his cheek, but he didn't brush it away. I don't know what to say, he confessed. I never knew. I believe you, Sarah said softly. And I don't blame you. I just thought you deserved to know. For the first time in what felt like years, Vincent felt something other than emptiness. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there, a glimmer of connection, of possibility. The journey ahead would be complicated, but as Sarah sat down across from him, Vincent knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed forever. The revelation of Sarah's existence had turned Vincent's carefully controlled world upside down. Days after her visit, he found himself consumed by memories of Evelyn Carter. Her laughter, her kindness, and the bittersweet farewell they'd shared so many years ago. Now, knowing that their love had produced a daughter, Vincent felt a strange mixture of regret and hope. Sarah had agreed to meet again, though she was clear that she didn't expect anything from him. That sentiment, however, didn't sit well with Vincent. He didn't just want to be a man she could meet and then forget about. He wanted to know her, to be a part of her life, to make up for the decades he had unknowingly missed. The mansion, once a symbol of his achievements, now felt suffocating in its silence. Vincent spent hours staring at old photographs and rereading Evelyn's letters, which Sarah had brought during her second visit. The letters were a portal to a life he might have had if he'd made different choices, a life with Evelyn and perhaps with Sarah as a child. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he murmured one night, holding one of the letters close to his chest. "I should have been there. I should have known." His determination to make things right began to manifest in small but significant changes. He called Sarah often, asking her questions about her life. What were her interests? What kind of childhood had she had? Was she happy? The more he learned, the more he felt an overwhelming sense of pride mixed with sorrow. She was resilient, intelligent, and kind, all the things he might have hoped for in a daughter. But he also learned of her struggles. Growing up without a father had been difficult, especially when Evelyn fell ill during Sarah's teenage years. Sarah had worked part-time jobs to help pay the bills and eventually put herself through college. Her independence was admirable, but Vincent couldn't help but feel guilty. If only he had known, he could have been there to support her. One evening, Vincent decided to do something he hadn't done in years: host a dinner. He asked Sarah to join him at the mansion, hoping to create a space where they could connect more deeply. When the night arrived, Vincent felt a rare flicker of nervousness. The dining room, usually cold and formal, had been softened with warm lighting and a simple centerpiece of flowers. Margaret had helped him select a menu that balanced elegance with comfort. When Sarah arrived, she looked around the grand house with a mix of awe and discomfort. "This place is massive," she said, her voice trailing off. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" Vincent replied with a self-deprecating chuckle. It was Catherine's dream, really. She loved to host and entertain. Sarah nodded but didn't press further. They sat down to dinner, and for the first time, Vincent felt the strange sensation of sharing his home with family again. As they talked, Vincent noticed how naturally their conversation flowed. Sarah told him about her career in nonprofit work, her passion for helping underserved communities, and her dream of one day starting her own organization. Her words were filled with conviction and purpose, and Vincent couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. "You're remarkable," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Your mother must have been so proud of you." "She was," Sarah said softly. "She always told me I could do anything, even when things were hard." "I just wish," she hesitated, her gaze dropping to her plate. "You wish what?" Vincent prompted gently. "I wish she'd told me about you sooner," Sarah admitted. "I spent so many years wondering if I was missing something, missing someone. And now that I've found you, I don't know how to feel about it." Vincent's heart ached at her honesty. "I don't expect you to forgive me for not being there," he said. "But I want you to know that I'm here now. For anything you need." Sarah's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of trust. "I appreciate that," she said, "but it's going to take time. This is all a lot." "I understand," Vincent said. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." As the evening wore on, Vincent realized just how much he wanted to be a part of Sarah's life. Not out of guilt, but because he genuinely cared for her. She was his daughter, and she deserved to know that she mattered. When Sarah left that night, Vincent wheeled himself to the window and watched her car disappear down the snowy driveway. The house felt quieter than ever, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel as empty. Vincent knew that rebuilding a relationship with Sarah would take effort and patience, but he was willing to give it everything he had. She had brought a spark of life back into his world, and he wasn't going to let it fade. What he didn't realize was that his newfound connection with Sarah would have ripple effects he couldn't yet predict, effects that would soon shake the fragile peace they were beginning to build. The newfound connection between Vincent and Sarah was fragile, like a delicate bridge suspended over a vast canyon of time and unspoken truths. While their conversations grew more comfortable, there was an unshakable tension beneath the surface, an acknowledgement of the years that couldn't be reclaimed, and the lingering question of what their relationship could become. Vincent had always been a man of action, and the guilt of missing Sarah's formative years gnawed at him relentlessly. He found solace in trying to contribute to her life now, offering support in any way he could. He began researching the nonprofit sector, hoping to better understand her world and find ways to help her achieve her dreams. But despite his best intentions, his efforts often came across as overbearing. One afternoon, during a lunch meeting at a cozy downtown cafe, Vincent handed Sarah a neatly prepared folder. Inside was a detailed proposal for a new nonprofit organization, complete with potential investors, funding sources, and a mission statement. Sarah opened the folder, her brows furrowing as she scanned the contents. "What is this?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I've been thinking about your goals," Vincent said, his voice tinged with excitement. "I know starting your own nonprofit is important to you, so I put together some ideas. With my resources, we could get this off the ground in no time." Sarah closed the folder and set it on the table. "Vincent, I appreciate the gesture, but this feels overwhelming. Starting something like this is a deeply personal journey for me. I need to do it my way, at my own pace." Vincent's enthusiasm faltered. "I didn't mean to overstep," he said, his voice softer now. "I just wanted to help." "I know," Sarah replied, her expression softening. "But sometimes the best way to help is to just listen and let me figure things out. I've been independent my whole life. It's hard for me to accept someone stepping in like this, even if it's well-intentioned." The exchange left Vincent feeling deflated but introspective. He realized that his desire to make up for lost time was clouding his judgment. He needed to respect Sarah's boundaries and allow their relationship to develop naturally without forcing his way into her life. But just as they were beginning to navigate these complexities, an unexpected complication arose. One evening, Vincent received a call from a private investigator he had hired shortly after Sarah's revelation. He hadn't told her about this decision, fearing it might seem intrusive. His intentions, however, were rooted in a need for certainty. Evelyn's letters had been heartfelt, but Vincent wanted to ensure there was no mistake about Sarah's identity. The investigator's voice was calm but serious. "Mr. Hamilton, I've completed the background checks and DNA comparisons you requested. The results confirm that Sarah Carter is indeed your biological daughter." Relief washed over Vincent, but it was short-lived as the investigator continued. "There's something else you should know," he said. "While reviewing financial records and other details, I came across some unusual activity. It seems Sarah has been in contact with an individual who has a history of targeting affluent families for financial gain. The connection isn't clear, but I thought you should be aware." Vincent's heart sank. He didn't want to believe that Sarah could have ulterior motives, but the revelation planted a seed of doubt. He struggled with whether to confront her or keep this information to himself. The last thing he wanted was to jeopardize their fragile relationship, but he also couldn't ignore the potential risk. When Sarah called him later that week, her voice cheerful as she shared updates about her current nonprofit projects, Vincent felt a pang of guilt. He wanted to trust her completely, to believe in the sincerity of her intentions. But the investigator's words lingered in his mind, casting a shadow over their interactions. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, sensing his unease. "No," Vincent replied quickly, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." Their conversation ended on a warm note, but Vincent's internal conflict only deepened. He knew he couldn't let suspicion dictate his actions, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As the days passed, Vincent began to notice subtle inconsistencies in some of Sarah's stories. Details that didn't add up or timelines that seemed off. He tried to dismiss these observations as paranoia, but his doubts grew louder with each passing day. The tension came to a head when Sarah visited the mansion unannounced, her demeanor slightly guarded. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said, sitting across from Vincent in his study. "There's something I need to tell you." Vincent's heart raced as he braced himself for whatever she was about to reveal. "I've been struggling financially," Sarah admitted, her voice heavy with emotion. "Between paying off my mom's medical bills and trying to fund my projects, I've made some decisions I'm not proud of. But I want to be honest with you." Her confession caught Vincent off guard, but it also disarmed him. The vulnerability in her voice was unmistakable, and it reminded him of Evelyn's strength and honesty. "I don't care about your past mistakes," Vincent said gently. "All I care about is building a future with you, Sarah. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." In that moment, the walls between them seemed to crumble, replaced by a tentative but genuine trust. But neither of them knew that the shadows of doubt and the complexities of their newfound bond were only the beginning of a much larger storm on the horizon. The storm that loomed over Vincent and Sarah's fragile relationship began to take form in subtle, unsettling ways. Vincent couldn't shake the doubts planted by the investigator's report, no matter how much he wanted to believe in Sarah's sincerity. Her financial struggles, though understandable, seemed to align too perfectly with the timing of her reappearance in his life. The question haunted him. Was she here for him or his fortune? Meanwhile, Sarah noticed a shift in Vincent's demeanor. His warmth, once so inviting, now felt guarded. Their conversations, once free-flowing, carried an undercurrent of tension. Sarah couldn't pinpoint when things had changed, but she felt the distance growing between them, and it left her with a sense of unease. The breaking point came one evening when Sarah visited the mansion. She arrived unannounced, carrying a stack of documents for a nonprofit initiative she was planning. "I thought we could go over these together," she said, her tone hopeful. Vincent hesitated before gesturing for her to sit. "Of course," he replied, though his voice lacked the enthusiasm she had come to expect. As they worked through the papers, Sarah noticed his distracted gaze and stiff responses. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Vincent, is something wrong?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. He set the papers down and sighed heavily. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." The seriousness in his tone made her heart race. "What is it? Have you been in contact with anyone who might have influenced your decision to come into my life?" he asked, his words deliberate. Sarah's brows furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I had a private investigator look into some things," Vincent admitted, his voice low. "It's not that I don't trust you, but he found someone you've been in contact with, someone who has a history of targeting wealthy individuals." Sarah's face flushed with a mixture of shock and anger. "You had me investigated? Without telling me?" "I needed to be sure," Vincent said, his tone defensive. "You showed up out of nowhere, and I've been burned before. I've had people use me, Sarah. I couldn't let that happen again." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily between them. Sarah stood, her hands trembling. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice cracking. "You think I'm here to take advantage of you?" "I don't want to think that," Vincent said, his expression pained. "But I had to protect myself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of anger, not sorrow. "You don't know me at all," she said, her voice shaking. "You claim you want to build a relationship with me, but the first chance you get, you doubt my intentions. Is this what you think of me? That I'm some kind of opportunist?" Vincent wheeled himself closer, his own frustration bubbling to the surface. "You have to understand, Sarah. My world is filled with people who see me as nothing more than a bank account. I've been betrayed by people I trusted, people I thought cared about me. I didn't want to believe that about you, but I couldn't ignore the possibility." Sarah shook her head, stepping back. "You didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. You let your fears define how you see me. I thought we were starting to build something real, but now I see that you don't trust me at all." Her words hit Vincent like a blow to the chest. He wanted to argue, to explain himself, but he knew there was truth in what she was saying. His fears, deeply rooted in past betrayals, had clouded his judgment and jeopardized the very relationship he was trying to nurture. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you." But Sarah was already gathering her things. "I need some time," she said, her tone resolute. "I can't do this right now." As she walked out of the mansion, Vincent felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alone. Days turned into weeks, and Vincent heard nothing from Sarah. He replayed their argument in his mind, agonizing over every word. He knew he had made a mistake, but he didn't know how to fix it. Margaret, his trusted housekeeper, noticed his growing despondency. "Why don't you reach out to her?" she suggested one afternoon. "I don't know if she'll want to hear from me," Vincent admitted. "You won't know unless you try," Margaret said gently. Vincent nodded, resolving to make amends. He began drafting a heartfelt letter, pouring his emotions onto the page. He wrote about his fears, his regrets, and his desire to earn Sarah's trust. But as he sealed the envelope, he couldn't shake the feeling that it might be too late. Unbeknownst to Vincent, Sarah was grappling with her own emotions. She wanted to believe in their relationship, but the wounds from their confrontation ran deep. She questioned whether they could ever overcome the barriers of mistrust and miscommunication. As father and daughter wrestled with their doubts and desires, the fragile foundation of their bond teetered on the brink of collapse. What neither of them realized was that an unexpected event was about to force them to confront their fears and decide whether their connection was worth fighting for. The days that followed Sarah's departure from Vincent's mansion were a blur of regret and uncertainty. Vincent found himself trapped in a cycle of self-doubt, the weight of his actions pressing on him like a constant, suffocating presence. He tried reaching out to Sarah, but each attempt was met with cold silence. His calls went unanswered, and the letter he had painstakingly written sat untouched on his desk. The gap between them seemed to widen with every passing moment, and with it, a sense of irreversible loss began to settle in his heart. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Vincent decided to take a drive. He needed to clear his mind, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his mansion and the memories of the past few weeks. As he wheeled his chair down the winding driveway and into the garage, the familiar hum of the engine seemed almost therapeutic. The world outside was peaceful, but his heart was anything but. With every mile that passed, the landscape seemed to blur into a haze of gray, a reflection of his internal turmoil. The drive led him to a small cafe by the water, a place he and Sarah had once visited together when they first began their tentative reconciliation. He hadn't planned on stopping there, but something drew him in. As he parked his car and wheeled himself up the familiar cobblestone path, a sense of déjà vu washed over him. The smell of fresh coffee and the sound of laughter from within the cafe made him feel like he had stepped into a different time, one where everything was right, and the weight of the past hadn't yet tainted their relationship. Inside, the cafe was quiet, save for a few patrons scattered at the tables. The barista, a young woman with a warm smile, greeted him as he entered. Vincent ordered a coffee and sat down by the window, staring out at the calm water. His mind wandered to Sarah, wondering what she was doing where she was, and if there was a chance, any chance, that they could ever rebuild the trust that had been shattered. As he sipped his coffee, a figure entered the cafe, and Vincent's heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah. She looked different, her eyes red and puffy, her expression distant. She walked to the counter, ordered something quickly, and sat down at a table near the back of the room. Vincent hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to approach her. But before he could make up his mind, she looked up and caught his eye. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was a heavy silence between them, but it wasn't the kind of silence that was comfortable. It was the kind that was thick with unspoken words, emotions that neither of them knew how to articulate. Sarah's gaze softened slightly, and she motioned for him to join her. "I didn't expect to see you here," Vincent said, his voice shaky as he wheeled himself to the table. "Neither did I," Sarah replied, her tone flat. She didn't smile. "I just needed to get away for a while." The two sat in silence for a few moments, neither knowing where to start. Finally, Vincent broke the silence. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, his voice full of remorse. "I know I've hurt you, Sarah. I shouldn't have doubted you, and I shouldn't have acted the way I did. But I need you to know that I never wanted to push you away." Sarah looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "I know," she said quietly, "but you don't understand how much it hurt. The moment you had me investigated, everything changed. You made me feel like I wasn't worth trusting. I needed you to be there for me, and instead, you pulled away." Vincent's heart ached at her words, and the guilt that had been eating away at him for weeks resurfaced with full force. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to protect myself, and I didn't know how to protect you. I've lost so much in my life, Sarah. People I thought I could trust, people who only wanted me for what I could give them. I didn't want to lose you, too." For the first time in weeks, Sarah's expression softened. "Vincent, I'm not like those people," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted anything from you. I just wanted to be part of your life. I wanted to find my place, not in your world of wealth and power, but in your heart." Her words hit Vincent like a tidal wave, and for a moment, he was at a loss for what to say. The weight of his fears and the pain of his decisions hung heavily between them, but in that moment, something shifted. It was as if the years of silence, the hurt, and the distance could finally be addressed, slowly but surely. But just as they began to find common ground, a sudden interruption shattered the fragile moment. The door to the cafe swung open and a man entered. He was tall, sharply dressed, and exuded an air of confidence that immediately made Vincent uneasy. The man's eyes scanned the room before landing on Sarah. "Sarah Carter," the man called out, his voice cold and authoritative. "I've been looking for you." Sarah froze, her face paling at the sound of his voice. Vincent immediately sensed something was wrong. The man walked toward their table, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "Who are you?" Vincent demanded, his voice suddenly tight with tension. The man didn't even acknowledge him. "You've been avoiding my calls, Sarah. We need to talk." Sarah stood up quickly, her chair scraping across the floor. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice shaking. The man didn't flinch. "I don't think you understand the situation. You owe me." Vincent could feel the air in the room shift, and a sense of unease settled over him like a thick fog. He didn't know who this man was, but he could tell from Sarah's reaction that he wasn't someone she wanted to be around. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the exchange. The trust he had barely begun to rebuild with Sarah teetering on the edge of collapse once more. "Sarah," Vincent said, his voice soft but filled with urgency. "Who is he?" Sarah's eyes were wide with fear, but she shook her head, not willing to speak. The man, however, seemed to take delight in the tension he was creating. "This isn't over, Sarah," he said, his voice icy. "You can't run from your past forever." With that, he turned and left the cafe, leaving a trail of unease in his wake. For the first time, Vincent realized that the past wasn't something either of them could outrun. It would always follow them, no matter how hard they tried to move forward. But what neither of them knew was that this man, and the dark secrets he carried, would change everything. The true test of their bond had only just begun. The days after the encounter with the mysterious man were filled with a sense of dread that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Vincent's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. The man's presence had unsettled him deeply, and he could see the fear in Sarah's eyes when he spoke to her. Whatever history they shared, it was clear that it was something neither of them wanted to revisit, yet the shadows of the past were closing in on them both. Vincent tried to reach out to Sarah again, but she remained distant, her responses short and strained. The moment in the cafe, the brief conversation with the man, had shaken her more than she was willing to admit. Sarah knew something she hadn't shared, and Vincent couldn't shake the feeling that he was once again being left out of the truth that was slowly unraveling in front of him. Meanwhile, Sarah was conflicted. She wanted to confide in Vincent, but the weight of her past, of her decisions, was too much for her to bear. The man who had approached her in the cafe, his name was William Grant, wasn't just anyone. He was a part of a life she had desperately tried to escape. Years ago, Sarah had been involved in a series of financial schemes, desperate for money and recognition. She had made deals with people who were ruthless, and William Grant was one of those people. When she had tried to distance herself from the business, she thought she had successfully severed all ties. But now, The past had come knocking on her door, and with it, the truth she had buried deep within her. Sarah had never intended for Vincent to get involved in this mess. She had come to love him, not for his wealth or status, but for the man he was, his kindness, his vulnerability, the way he made her feel seen and valued. But now, it seemed that the ghosts of her past were going to haunt them both, whether she liked it or not. One evening, after days of silence, Sarah found herself standing in front of Vincent's mansion once again. She had come to a decision. She couldn't hide anymore. She needed to come clean. As she rang the doorbell, her heart pounded in her chest, unsure of what reception she would receive. Would Vincent listen? Would he understand? Or had the damage already been done? Vincent answered the door, his expression guarded. He had spent the past few days in turmoil, trying to piece together the puzzle of Sarah's life, but he hadn't made any headway. When he saw her standing there, looking vulnerable and uncertain, something inside him softened. "Sarah," he began, his voice low. "I need to tell you everything," she interrupted, stepping inside before he could say more. "I can't keep this from you anymore." They sat down in the living room, the silence between them heavy and uncomfortable. Vincent watched Sarah as she took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. The weight of her past was apparent in her eyes, and he knew whatever she was about to say would change everything. "I never wanted you to find out about William," she began, her voice trembling. "But he's not just anyone. He's part of a life I tried to leave behind. Years ago, I made some bad choices. I got involved in some shady financial deals, thinking I could make something of myself. I was desperate, Vincent. I wanted out of the poverty I grew up in, and I thought money would solve everything." Vincent remained silent, but his expression softened as he listened. His heart ached for Sarah, but there was also a sense of betrayal stirring inside him. He had trusted her with his heart, and now the truth was unraveling in front of him. He had to ask the question, even though he feared the answer. "What did he want from you, Sarah?" Vincent asked quietly. Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "He wants money," she admitted. "I owe him. I owe him everything I built since I left that life behind. He's been threatening to expose everything I did, Vincent. All the lies, the schemes. He wants to ruin me." Vincent felt a cold wave of anger wash over him. "So, he's using you," he said, his voice harsh. "He's using your past against you to get what he wants." "I never wanted this to affect you," Sarah said, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I could keep it hidden, but now I see that it's all falling apart. I didn't want you to see me like this, Vincent. I didn't want you to know what I've done." Vincent took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. He had always prided himself on being a man of principles, someone who valued honesty and integrity. But as he looked at Sarah, he realized that the woman in front of him wasn't defined by her past. She was someone who had made mistakes. Yes, but she was also someone who had the courage to change. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the choices she had made. And for a brief moment, he understood what it meant to truly love someone. Not just for their good qualities, but also for their flaws, their brokenness. "I don't know what to say," Vincent admitted, his voice quiet. I don't know if I can just ignore the fact that you kept this from me. But I want to help you, Sarah. I want to be there for you." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at him, her heart heavy with guilt. "I don't deserve your help," she whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Vincent reached out and took her hand in his grip firm and steady. "You don't have to be perfect," he said softly. "We all have our pasts. What matters is what we do with our future. And I believe in you, Sarah. I believe that you're more than the mistakes you made." For the first time since their argument, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this. The road ahead would be difficult, and there was no guarantee of what would happen. But in that moment, they shared something more powerful than just love: trust. They both knew that this wasn't going to be easy, but they were willing to fight for each other. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Vincent smiled gently. "I'm not going anywhere." As the night wore on, the conversation turned to what they would do next. William's threats loomed large over them both, and they knew that they couldn't ignore him forever. But for the first time in a long time, they felt like they were in this together. They had faced the darkness of their past, and they had found the strength to move forward. And in the midst of the storm, they both realized that love, like trust, could be rebuilt. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be fast, but it was worth fighting for.